drown for the roles. How you guys been? I hope you've been good. Hope you've been safe. Also, I hope you've been checking out the other clips. We have a couple of them lined up. Do check up on them to flow with this. This whole discussion. Now the time we've been waiting for, Mehdi Hasan. I'm dead as hyped to get to know what he has to say. It's been we've had like around 4-5 clips we've reacted to, and a lot have been said. Like a lot has been said. Tensions ran high, emotions as well ran high. So right now, let's indulge and get to see what Mehdi Hasan has to say. Also, don't forget, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the share, and as well the notification icon as well. So let's see what's good.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Assalamu alaikum. Lovely to see you all here tonight. We are having a very entertaining night, are we not, with some very interesting things being said from the other side of the house tonight. Let me begin by saying, as a Muslim, as a representative of Islam, I would consider myself an ambassador for Islam, a believer in Islam, a follower of Islam and its Prophet. So in that capacity, let me begin by apologizing to Anne-Marie for the Bali bombings. I apologize for the role of my...
I love how he starts with a bit of satire, a bit of humor, a bit of rhetoric to, ease up the tension in the room, and also to, give a response to some of the wild claims that were made. Let's listen to
my religion and me and my people for the killing of Theo van Gogh, for 7/7. Yes, that was all of us. That was Islam, that was Muslims, that was the Quran. I mean, astonishing claims to make in the very first speech tonight on a day like today, where the Conservative Prime Minister of the United Kingdom is having to come out and point out that these kind of views are anathema. And I believe you're trying to stand for the Labour Party to become an MP in Brighton. If you do, and you make...
Expose them. Show their agendas, show their interest over here.
These comments, I'm guessing you'll have the whip withdrawn from you, but then again, UKIP's on the rise, they'll take you, the BNP, they might have something to say about your views.
This is what Mehdi Hasan always does.
By the way, just on a factual point, since we heard a lot about the second speaker, about how backward we Muslims all are, on a factual point, you said that Islam was born in Saudi Arabia. Islam was born in 610 AD. Saudi Arabia was born in 1932 AD. So you were only 1,322 years off. Not bad?
Beat them with the facts. Whip them with the facts.
Not bad start there. Talking of maths, by the way, a man named Al-Khawarizmi was one of the greatest mathematicians of all time, a Muslim, worked in the golden age of Islam. He's the guy who came up with not just algebra, but algorithms. Without algorithms, you wouldn't have laptops. Without laptops...
The same comments I made about during Daniel Johnson's speech. Like, he mentioned on Muslim countries will not allow for such debates to be held. Yet, we have facts upon facts. We have evidence upon evidence that they actually did happen.
Algorithms, you wouldn't have laptops. Without laptops, Daniel Johnson tonight wouldn't have been able to print out his speech in which he came to berate us Muslims for holding back the advance and intellectual achievements of the West, which all happened without any contribution from anyone else other than the Judeo-Christian people of Europe. In fact, Daniel David Levering, the author of the Pulitzer Prize-winning historian and author of The Golden Crucible, points out that there would be no Renaissance, there would be no Reformation in Europe without the role played by Ibn Sina and Ibn Rushd and some of the great Muslim theologians, philosophers, scientists in bringing Greek texts to Europe. As for this being our university, I will leave that to the imagination as to who...
Before we get to the whole our or the personalization of the university, the society, he does a very impeccable job to respond to the claims, the comments that were made. and you can tell from the crowd, you can tell from the room, because like the room is a mixture of, I bet like people from different ethnicities, people from different walks of life, as well people from different like religious backgrounds. You can tell when somebody is reaching, even in certain debates, and easily you see how relaxed, calm, and composed Mehdi is, and he's dismantling the opposing views of the team of Daniel Johnson and Anne Marie.
Who is our and who is there? I studied here too. An astonishing set of speeches so far making this case tonight. A mixture of just cherry-picked quotes, facts and figures, self-serving, selective, a farrago of distortions, misrepresentations, misinterpretations, misquotations. Daniel talked about my article in the New Statesman, which got me a lot of flack, where I talked about the anti-Semitism that is prevalent in some parts of the Muslim community, which indeed it is. Of course, I didn't say in that piece that it was caused by the religion of Islam. In fact, modern anti-Semitism in the Middle East was imported from, finish the sentence, Judeo-Christian Europe, where I believe some certainly bad things happened to the Jewish people. In fact, Tom Friedman, Jewish-American columnist in the New York Times,
there's a speaker I was listening to, he did mention on, like, arguably would not have the Jews existing if it were not for like the Muslims, because like if you look back at it, during which era? During the time like when the Muslims as well took over Spain. Not even Spain. I have remembered, like when Salahuddin, the conqueror, like he took over Jerusalem. At the time, it was being ruled by the Crusaders, the Roman Catholic Crusaders. There was no Jew inside up until like Salahuddin took it. I think it's Salahuddin who took it, or Omar ibn Khattab. I'm trying to separate between the two, because as well Omar did conquer Jerusalem first, as then afterwards they were dethroned. The Roman Catholics did take it back, and then Salahuddin came again, conquered, set upon rules. It's a long as history. I'm not supposed to be cussing as well. But you find that when they ask about like, are there Jews in Jerusalem? They're like, no. They have all been executed by, the Roman Catholic, the Crusaders per se. Fast forward to like Second World War, when the Jews were being massacred, where did they run to? Like if you do study your history, where did they run to? They ran to northern parts of Africa. The likes of is it Morocco, if I'm not wrong? Like Islamic countries in North Africa. So like I find it interesting that also as well I was to mention during the clip on Daniel Johnson. It's odd that he doesn't keep the same energy to mention that how like the Palestinians are suffering under the Israeli rule, yet Israel as a nation as a country was established post World War II to settle the Jews who are now being taken from now Northern Africa to now being settled now, like in the Palestinian land. I mean, it's interesting when you get to study about such things.
Told me in this very chamber last week that he believed, had Muslims been running Europe in the 1940s, told me in this very chamber last week that he believed, had Muslims been running Europe in the 1940s, 6 million extra Jews would still be alive today. So I'm not going to take lessons in anti-Semitism from someone who's here to defend the Judeo-Christian values of a continent that murdered 6 million Jews. Moving swiftly on.
Mike, drops Mike.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm about to make that point. No, I'm about to make that point. You're right. I agree with you 110%. That is my point. I don't think Europe is evil or bad. I'm a very proud European. I don't want to judge Europe on that basis, but if we're going to play this gutter game where we pull out the Bali bombing and we pull out examples of anti-Semitism in the Islamic community, then of course I'm going to come back and say, well, hold on. I mean, look, let's be very clear. Daniel here was a last-minute replacement for Douglas Murray, who had to pull out. And Douglas and I have a well-documented differences, but to be fair to Douglas, as to be fair to Anne-Marie and to Peter, atheists.
Like, this clip I'll speak too much, but Mandem came strapped Mandem came strapped, I mean, god damn it. Like, he's talking about how Daniel Johnson was a replacement, so he was not even in the first, like, he was not even in the first draft. He was not even in the first panel. God damn it, that hurts. Like, I bet he's boiling in the sea. He was boiling in the sea, like, Mandem is dropping bombshells. Mehdi is dropping, like, Mandem is dropping the mic. And I'm hyped to the take.
But to be fair to Douglas, as to be fair to Anne-Marie and to Peter, atheists see all religions as evil, violent, threatening.
Yeah.
What the problem I have with Daniel's speech is that Daniel comes here to run this robust defense of Christianity, forgetting that his fellow Christians, people who said they were acting in the name of Jesus, gave us the Crusades, the Spanish Inquisition,
exactly the things I was talking about, like the Spanish Inquisition, the Crusades, like when I mentioned about like how the Muslims ruled over Spain. It was around 500 to 700 years. That's like for close to 5 centuries, you know. Then we come now play this game of my religion versus your religion. Then when you sit down and now start going into factual debates, I've had those kind of discussions where I speak to somebody, is like, especially like with the Christians, you mention about like killings in the Old Testament. They use these. I remember Anne-Marie mentioned on like the Surah Toba, like the 9th chapter, about the kill the infidels where you find them. I found it interesting because there are numerous verses in the Bible. Like I mentioned on how Samson took the jawbone of a donkey and killed 20,000. Was it Philistines? Yeah, 20,000 Philistines. Those Philistines were people. They had souls. They had families. You know, I spoke about like how like the Amalekites were made extinct. You know, from the mothers to the fathers to the sons to the daughters. Do not even spare the suckling children. Do not spare like even the suckling babies. I mean, God, like then when you have that debate, you tell the person like, you know, even like about like David and was it David and Solomon? No, it was David and the king who came before David. Is it Saul? I think it's Saul. About like how Saul has killed 1,000 and David has killed tens of thousands. How when Saul kills like millions, then David kills like, you know, hundreds of millions. Like it's interesting. Then they flip and now talk about like, you know, that is in the Old Testament right now, in the New Covenant, New Testament. But then again, you find like verses in Revelation where about how Christ per se will come and find this harlot woman, and then he'll kill her, then kill her children. I'm like, sir, if you say we're going to talk about like killings in the New Testament, the Bible as well mentions that Christ says this is a time of selling your cloak to buy a sword. It talks about like, bring for me the disbelievers and I will kill them. I mean, so what point was they driving to? Let me stop ranting too much.
In the name of Jesus, gave us the Crusades, the Spanish Inquisition, the anti-Jewish pogroms, European colonialism in Africa and Asia, the Lord's Resistance Army in Uganda, not to mention countless arson and bomb attacks on abortion clinics in the United States of America to this very day. I would like a little bit of humility from Daniel first before he begins lecturing other communities and other faiths on violence, terror, and intolerance. But no, thank you. Take some water. But I would say this, to address the gentleman's very valid point here, I'm not going to play that game. I don't actually believe that Christianity is a religion of violence and hate because of what the LRA does in Uganda or what Crusaders did to Jews and Muslims in Jerusalem when they took back the city in the 12th or 13th or whatever century it was. I believe that Christianity, like Islam, like pretty much every mainstream religion, is based on love and compassion and faith. I do follow a religion in which 113 out of the 114 chapters of the Quran begins by introducing the God of Islam as a God of mercy and compassion. I would not have it any other way. I don't follow a religion which introduces my God to me as a God of war, as some kind of Greek God of wrath, as a God of hate and injustice. Not at all. As Adam pointed out, you go through the Quran and you see the mercy and the love and the justice. And yes, you have verses that refer to warfare and violence. Of course it does. This is not a motion about pacifism. I'm not here to argue that Islam is a pacifistic faith. It is not. Islam allows military action, violence in certain limited contexts. And yes, a minority of Muslims do take it out of that context. But is it religious?
I find it justified and borderline equilibrium to, like, he's smoking both parties, himself and the opposing team. Like, he doesn't want to play that gutter game of let me drag it through the mud because of this is your categorization, so let me drag it through the mud. But he's like, hey, in as much as you guys are wrong, on this other side here, as his fellow religious mates, those who take it out of context, because as well the Quran, I think, if I'm not wrong, does mention on like how God does not like those who, like, you know, do it in extremes. Like, even there are numerous hadiths about like how, like, there's a group of people who came to the wives of the Prophet, I think it was Aisha if I'm not wrong, and they asked about like how does he pray, how does he fast. Then she mentions on like he prays certain days, some days, like in extension, like, you know, for the night prayers, the extended night prayers. Then he's like, some nights he spends like hours praying until his feet are numb or they swell. Then some on fasting, he fasts some days he does not. So the guys in response mentioned on, we shall be praying the entire night. Then they were like, in terms of fasting, they shall be fasting, you know, like the entire week. So it became like the whole idea of like competing with the Prophet per se. And it's interesting that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, like he got mad and was, you know, he did respond to them and told them not to practice their religion in, you know, extreme measures.
Talked about Woolwich. Daniel and Anne-Marie have suggested that it's definitely religion that's behind all of this. Well, actually, what I find so amusing tonight is we're having a debate about Islam, and the opposition tonight have come forward. We have a graduate in law, a graduate in modern history, a graduate in chemistry, and you know, I admire all of their intellects and their abilities, but we don't have anyone who's actually an expert on Islam, a scholar of Islam, a historian of Islam, a speaker of Arabic, even a terrorism expert or a security expert or a pollster, let alone to talk about what Muslims believe or think. Instead, we have people coming here, putting forward these views, putting forward these sweeping opinions. Listen to Professor Robert Pape of the University of Chicago, one of America's leading terrorism experts, who, unlike our esteemed opposition tonight, studied every single case of suicide terrorism between 1980 and 2005, 315 cases in total. And he concluded, and I quote, "There is little connection between suicide terrorism and Islamic fundamentalism or any of the world's religions. Rather, what nearly all suicide terrorist attacks have in common is a specific secular and strategic goal to compel modern democracies to withdraw military forces from territory that the terrorists consider to be their homeland." And
it's more of, like he's saying, it's more of control over certain territories, control over certain resources, access to resources, the tax kickbacks, you know, like the kickbacks from the resources. So sometimes they do align to certain religious sects or denominations. But it's interesting how, like, he knows, he breaks down what their various disciplines are. There are those, like he mentioned about those who study like history, there are those who study like was it chemistry if I'm not wrong. Yeah, they have different fields of study. Yeah, they're coming to speak on behalf of like religious discussions. They do not have like a background in it. It's more of know thy enemy, know thyself, Sun Tzu. Just hyped.
Irony is, when we talk about terrorism, the irony is that the opposition and the Muslim terrorists, the Al-Qaeda types, actually have one thing in common, because they both believe that Islam is a war. Terrorists, the Al-Qaeda types, actually have one thing in common, because they both believe that Islam is a warlike, violent religion. They both agree on that. They have everything in common. Osama bin Laden would be nodding along to everything he's heard tonight from the opposition side. He agrees with them. The problem is that mainstream Muslims don't. The majority of Muslims around the world don't. In fact, a gentleman here started quoting all sorts of polls. Gallup carried out the biggest
Like
poll.
the whole idea of if you kill, like as the Quran mentions, like if you kill one individual, it's like you've killed the entire humanity, and if you save one individual, it's as though you've saved the entire humanity. But we still had personalities like Osama who are associated with number one the religion, number two like terrorism, like these whole ideas of like the Iraqi bombings, the Afghanistan bombings. We have numerous channels that have debunked in depth. It had nothing to do with the religion. It was all about either power, either oil or currency, which currency will be dominant.
The world don't. In fact, a gentleman here started quoting all sorts of polls. Gallup carried out the biggest poll of Muslims around the world of 50,000 Muslims in 35 countries. 93% of Muslims rejected 9/11 and suicide attacks. And of the 7% who didn't, they all, when polled and focus grouped, cited political reasons for their support for violence, not religious reasons. And as for Islamic scholars and what they say, well, Daniel talks about our University of Oxford. We'll go down to Oxford Centre for Islamic Studies, get hold of a man named Sheikh Afifi al-Akiti, who is a massively well-credentialed and well-respected Islamic scholar who has studied across the world, who in the days after 7/7 published a fatwa denouncing terrorism in the name of Islam, calling for the protection of all non-combatants at all times and describing suicide bombings as an innovation with no basis in Islamic law. Go and listen to Sheikh Tahir al-Qadri, one of Pakistan's most famous Islamic scholars, who published a 600-page fatwa condemning the killing of all innocents and all suicide bombings unconditionally without any ifs or buts. There's nothing new.
That's the beauty. That's the beauty with that's something I find beautiful, like with the Islamic religion. One bombing, then he gives a fatwa of 600 pages. Hey my, damn, that's long. That's big. It's more of if those practitioners deviate from the path, it's the responsibility of the others to take them back, into the fold. Tell them where they are wrong, for them to change their ways. But on the flip side, with the other religions, you find like with the Jews, they're more of confined to their spaces. With the Christians, it's more of my denomination is doing this, so I'm okay with that. Your other denomination is not, so for you is your space, for me is mine. But I don't think it's supposed to be like that. In my opinion, I believe you're supposed to keep each other accountable. But down in the comment section, tell me what you think.
Here, this is mainstream Islam, mainstream scholarship, which has said this for years. You don't go out and kill people willy-nilly in the high street or anywhere else, on a bus or a mall, based on verses of the Quran that you cherry-pick without any context, any understanding, any interpretation, or any commentary.
Point of information.
Please.
What about stoning of women, for example, in such lives?
Well,
It doesn't happen apparently.
I didn't say it doesn't happen at all. I never said it didn't happen. I don't blame Islam. Yes, it's a very good point. And a lot of us are campaigning against that. And we're campaigning against it in the name of Islam. We're campaigning against it in the name of various interpretations of Islam. Anne-Marie comes and scares us with her talk of Sharia law. I would like to see the book of Sharia law. It doesn't exist. People argue over what Sharia law is. And you empower the extremists by saying there is only one version. You empower them all. I don't believe you took any interruptions, Anne-Marie, so I think you should stay there for a moment.
Here we go. To be fair, she didn't allow for Q&A during her session. Daniel Johnson as well didn't allow for Q&A during his session, so why they interrupting though?
Here's what we're dealing with. Here's what we're dealing with. I took your point. Here we are dealing with a 1400-year-old global religion, followed by 1.6 billion people in every corner of the world, a quarter of humanity, of all backgrounds, cultures, ethnicities. And yet the opposition tonight wants to generalize, stereotype, smear in order to desperately win this debate. And here's my question, if we're going to generalize and smear. People say yesterday's bombers, and we've got to be careful, there's a trial going on, were yesterday's attackers, motivated by Islam? Big debate. I don't believe they were. Let's say they were. Let's say Faisal Shahzad, the Times Square bomber, was motivated by Islam. Let's assume, for sake of argument, that Richard Reeves, the shoe bomber, was motivated by Islam. If Islam is responsible for these killings, if Islam is what is motivating these people, and Islam is therefore not a religion of peace, a religion of war, then ask yourself this question: why aren't the rest of us doing it? Why is It's such a tiny...
That's a very important question. Like they're close to over 2 billion. 2 billion to over 8, that's a quarter, that's 25% of the globe believe in one specific religion. So why don't they all do the extreme version of it, like, as they are trying to portray the position that they're pushing for, that agenda of like the true practitioners, this is what they perform. So why don't all the others, like from the fathers, the grandfathers, the sons, the mothers, the daughters, the grandmothers, all just, blow themselves up all at once? He'll give the answer in a moment.
Any minority of Muslims are interpreting their religion in the way that the opposition claim they are. Let's assume there are 16,000 suicide bombers in the world. There aren't. Let's assume there are for the sake of argument. That's 0.001% of the Muslim population globally. What about the other 99.99% of Muslims who the opposition tonight either ignore or smear? The reality is that the rest of us aren't blowing ourselves up tonight. The reality is that the opposition came here tonight not worried about the fact that me and Adam might pull open our jackets and blow ourselves up tonight because we're followers of a warlike warrior religion which wants to take over Europe and Daniel's university. The issue is this. The issue is this. Unless the opposition can tell us tonight, and Peter Atkins is here, one of our great atheist intellectuals, can tell us tonight, can answer this question tonight, why don't the vast majority of Muslims around the world behave as violently and aggressively as a tiny minority of politically motivated extremists? Then they might as well give up and stop pretending they have anything relevant to say about Islam or Muslims as a whole. Ladies and gentlemen, let me just say this to you. Think about what the opposite of this motion is. If you vote no tonight, think about what you're saying the opposite of this motion is. That Islam isn't a religion of peace, it's a religion of war, of violence, of terror, of aggression. That the people who follow Islam, me, my wife, my retired parents, my 6-year-old child, that 1.8 million of your fellow British residents and citizens, that 1.6 billion people across the world, your fellow human beings, are all followers, promoters, believers in a religion of violence. Do you really think that? Do you really believe that to be the case? They say that in the Oxford Union, the most famous debate was in 1933 when Adolf Hitler looked out for the result of the King and Country motion, where they voted against fighting for King and Country, and Hitler was listening out for the result. Well, tonight, 80 years on, there are two groups of people around the world who I would argue are waiting for the result of tonight's vote. There are the millions of peaceful, non-violent, law-abiding Muslims both in the UK, Europe, Asia, Africa and beyond, who see Islam as the source of their identity, as a source of spiritual fulfillment, of hope, of solace. And there are the phobes, the haters, the bigots out there who want to push the clash of civilizations, who want to divide all of us into them and us and ours and their. Ladies and gentlemen, I urge you all not to fuel the arguments of the phobes and bigots. Don't legitimize their divisions. Don't legitimize their hate. Trust those Muslims who you know, who you've met, who you hear, who don't believe in violence, who do want you to hear the peaceful message of the Quran as they believe it to be taught to the majority of Muslims, the Islam of peace and compassion and mercy, the Islam of the Quran, not of Al-Qaeda. Ladies and gentlemen, I beg to propose this motion to the House. I urge you to vote yes tonight. Thank you very much for your time.
Ooh, man, them came prepared. All the smoke, he wants all the smoke. Like, shout out still to Oxford Union. If you want to, take a listen to an interrupted clip, it will be linked in the description box, and you can go take a listen from one point to the end. If you ask me, I think Mehdi doing this debate, if you do ask me, like, I think because he's a very composed speaker. Like he doesn't stutter, he doesn't mix words, he speaks fast as well. Then like it's just smooth off the tongue, But down in the comment section, tell me what's your take, tell me what points you found interesting. Give me your honest review on it, Also tell me like which other videos you'd like me to check out and give my opinion on. Don't forget, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, share, notification bell, and I'll see you on the next clip. Stay safe.